The chill of the early morning crept through the cracked window as Emma tightened her thin cardigan around her shoulders. The city hadn't been kind to her since her husband's death. The job she managed to find barely paid enough to keep the lights on and food on the table for her two boys, Sam and Ethan. But this morning, as she looked out the window while sipping her bitter coffee, something unusual caught her eye. Across the street, a sleek black car pulled up beside the dumpsters in front of a grand mansion. A man in a crisp suit and polished shoes stepped out, dragging behind him a large roll, wrapped in dark cloth. His movements were deliberate, his gaze darting around as if making sure no one was watching. Emma squinted, curiosity piqued, as he carelessly tossed the bundle into the dumpster. The man's actions felt odd, too secretive for something as mundane as throwing out trash. But as the man drove away in his luxurious car, Emma saw the roll unfold slightly. It wasn't just cloth, it was a rug, ornate, plush, and looking expensive. Even in the early light, a rush of thoughts flooded her mind. Why would someone throw away something so valuable? It seemed almost wasteful. She hesitated, glancing back into her tiny apartment where her boys slept soundly in their shared bed. They deserved better than secondhand clothes and meals that never quite filled them up. The impulse was too strong to ignore. She put on her coat and hurried across the street as she neared the dumpster. Her hands trembled, both from the cold and the sense that she might be doing something wrong. But when she unwrapped the edge of the rug, she gasped. It was beautiful. Deep reds and intricate gold patterns woven into the fabric, soft under her calloused fingers. It must have been worth thousands, even with a few smudges of dirt. But before she could roll it back up, a dark stain caught her eye, spreading across one of the corners. Emma frowned, running her fingers over it. The fabric was damp, and as she lifted her hand, she saw her fingertips stained red. A wave of unease washed over her. It wasn't just dirt. It looked like blood. Emma pulled her hand back sharply, her breath quickening as she wiped the red stain on the rough fabric of her coat. Her mind raced. It couldn't be blood, could it? Maybe it was just some spilled paint or wine or something equally harmless. But the thought gnawed at her, and she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this rug than met the eye. She glanced around the empty street, the silence of dawn pressing in. The mansion across the road stood still, its high windows reflecting the first hints of light. Whoever that man was, he had gone, disappearing behind the tinted windows of his sleek car. It would be easy to walk away, to leave the rug behind and pretend she had never seen it. But the image of her boys, bundled up in thin blankets, shivering during the coldest nights, made her hesitate. This rug, if cleaned and sold, could fetch enough money to pay the overdue bills, maybe even buy a few new clothes for her children. The temptation was too strong to resist, and she found herself rolling the heavy fabric back up, struggling to hoist it onto her shoulder as she made her way back to her apartment. The weight of the rug seemed to press down on her conscience as much as on her back. Each step echoed in the empty corridor of her building, until she reached her door, fumbling with the keys and nudging it open with her shoulder. Inside, she leaned the rug against the peeling wallpaper, her breathing ragged from the effort. Sam, her oldest at 12, stirred from the couch where he had fallen asleep. He rubbed his eyes, looking at the rug with a puzzled expression. "Mom, what's that?" he mumbled, his voice still thick with sleep. Emma forced a smile, trying to hide the unease in her voice. "Just something I found. Thought it might be worth something if I clean it up a bit." But as she spoke, a soft, muffled noise reached her ears, coming from the direction of the rug. Her heart skipped a beat. She strained to listen, wondering if it had just been her imagination, but then it came again. Barely perceptible, like a soft rustling, as if something inside the rolled fabric had moved. Her mouth went dry. She reached out a trembling hand, her fingertips brushing against the plush surface. Was there something hidden inside the rug? The thought sent a shiver down her spine. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself, as she slowly began to unroll the rug on the living room floor. With each twist, the pattern unfurled, revealing more of the intricate designs. but as the last layer came loose, she froze. There, tucked into the folds of the rug, was a small black velvet pouch. It was tied tightly with a red cord, its contents hidden. Emma's hand hovered over it, her mind racing with possibilities. Treasure, secrets, or perhaps something far more sinister. She hesitated, then reached for the pouch. As she tugged at the cord, her mind screamed with doubt. What if this is something I shouldn't see? But it was too late. Curiosity had already won. The cord came loose, and she tipped the pouch open, revealing what lay inside. Emma's breath caught as she tipped the pouch, its contents sliding into her palm with a soft clink. She stared down, her fingers brushing against cold, smooth metal. Gold coins, old and worn, their surfaces etched with symbols she couldn't recognize. There were a few. Small gems, too, glittering in the dim light of her living room, reflecting a wealth that was entirely out of place in her world. Her mind raced, the implications hitting her like a wave. This could change everything. For a moment, she allowed herself to imagine what this could mean. A fresh start for her and the boys. No more scraping by, no more eviction threats. But beneath that rush of hope, a darker thought lurked. Why would anyone throw something like this away? She picked up one of the coins, turning it between her fingers. It was heavier than she expected, the engravings unfamiliar, almost ancient. As she examined it more closely, a cold dread began to creep up her spine. The symbols carved into the surface resembled strange figures, faces twisted in expressions of pain or rage. Her stomach twisted, and she quickly dropped the coin back into the pouch. "Mom? What's wrong?" Sam's voice snapped, her back to reality, and she realized he was staring at her with concern, his wide eyes darting between her and the mysterious rug. She forced a smile, slipping the pouch into her pocket as casually as she could. "Nothing, sweetie, just a little surprised. That's all." She tried to keep her voice steady, but her hands betrayed her, trembling as she patted the pouch hidden in her coat pocket. Sam seemed to sense her unease, but he only nodded too. Used to seeing his mother worry, Emma ruffled his hair, trying to act normal. "Why don't you go back to sleep for a bit? It's still early." He hesitated, then shrugged and wandered back to the couch, curling up under his thin blanket. Emma watched him for a moment, her heart aching with a mother's worry. She glanced at the rug sprawled across her living room floor, its luxurious patterns now tainted by the dark stain in the corner. She knew she should call someone, maybe the police, or at least ask someone about the strange coins. But a nagging voice in her head whispered against it. What if they take it all away? Her boys needed this, needed the chance to have something more than just survival. Yet, that same voice was shadowed by fear. What if this is dangerous? She found herself walking to the window, her gaze drawn back to the mansion across the street. The curtains in one of the windows fluttered, and she thought she saw a figure standing there, watching her. A chill crawled down her spine, and she stepped back, her heart pounding in her chest. But when she looked again, the window was dark, empty. The morning sun began to seep through the clouds, casting a gray light over the street. Emma turned back to the rug, her mind spinning with unanswered questions. Who was that man? And why would he throw away something so valuable? Something that felt like it came with a heavy, dangerous secret? But there was no time to dwell on those thoughts. She had to hide the coins before the boys woke up fully and before she decided what to do next. With one last glance at the rug, she tucked the pouch deep into a drawer beneath a stack of old bills, her thoughts tangled with possibilities, and the creeping sense that her life had just changed in ways she couldn't yet understand. Emma spent the rest of the morning in a haze, her mind divided between the coins hidden away in the drawer and the uneasy feeling that clung to her like a shadow. She tried to focus on the day's chores, making breakfast for Sam and Ethan, tidying up their small apartment. But every sound from outside made her jump, her heart racing with the fear of being discovered. By midday, she had convinced herself that she was overreacting. The coins were probably just antique trinkets, Valuable to collectors, but not connected to anything sinister, she even started to consider finding a pawn shop where she could sell a few, just to see how much they were worth. But just as she was folding the last of the laundry, a loud knock rattled the front door, making her nearly drop the clothes in her hands. She froze, her mind immediately jumping to the worst possibilities. Was it the police? Or someone looking for the rug? Her pulse quickened, and she took a deep breath, forcing herself to calm down. It could just be the landlord, asking about the rent, she thought, though even that possibility made her stomach twist with anxiety. She crept to the door, pressing her ear against the wood, hoping to hear something that would give her a clue. But there was only silence on the other side. After a moment's hesitation, she reached for the knob and cracked the door open just enough to peer through. Man stood in the dim hallway, his face partially hidden by the shadow of his hat. He was tall, wearing a coat that looked expensive, its collar pulled up against the chill of the day. His eyes, sharp and gray, met hers through the narrow gap, and a polite, tight-lipped smile spread across his face. "Good afternoon, ma'am," he said, his voice smooth, but with an edge that made Emma's skin prickle. "I hope I'm not intruding. I just have a few questions. About something you might have found this morning." Emma's grip tightened on the edge of the door, her mind racing. How does he know? She swallowed hard, trying to keep her expression neutral. "I'm not sure what you mean," she replied, forcing a casual tone. "I didn't find anything." The man's smile didn't falter, but his eyes narrowed slightly, studying her. "I believe you might have picked up a rug near the house across the street," he continued, his tone remaining polite, but with a coldness that sent a chill down her spine. "It's a rather valuable item, you see. My employer would very much like to have it back." She felt a knot form in her stomach, but she kept her face as blank as she could manage. "I'm sorry, but I think you've got the wrong person," she said, inching the door closed. But before she could shut it fully, the man's hand shot out, pressing against the door with surprising strength. His smile faded, and his voice dropped to a low, threatening tone. "Now, let's not make this difficult, Miss Harper. We both know what you took. Just hand it over, and I'll forget I was ever here." Her breath caught in her throat. He knew her name, knew where she lived. Panic clawed at her chest, but she forced herself to stay calm. "I don't know what you're talking about," she managed, her voice shaking. "Now please, leave before I call the police." For a moment, the man's expression hardened, his eyes flashing with something dark. Then, just as quickly, he pulled back, releasing the door and adjusting his coat as if brushing away the encounter. "Very well, Miss Harper. I'll leave you to your, day." He tipped his hat slightly, his polite smile returning, though it no longer reached his eyes. "But do think carefully about your next steps. It would be a shame if something unfortunate were to, happen!" With that, he turned and walked down the hallway, his footsteps echoing until they faded away. Emma slammed the door shut, locking it with shaking hands. She leaned her forehead against the cool wood, her mind reeling. What have I gotten myself into? The coins in the drawer felt like they were burning a hole through the walls, their hidden presence growing more dangerous with every passing second. She knew now that keeping them wouldn't be simple, and as she glanced back at her sons, playing quietly in the corner of the living room, she realized that whatever secrets the rug held, they were already deeper than she had imagined. The afternoon wore on, but Emma couldn't shake the encounter from her mind. The man's cold eyes, his veiled threats, every word felt like a warning that reverberated inside her skull. She paced back and forth in the cramped living room, glancing out the window every few minutes, expecting to see him standing there, watching. But the street outside remained empty, the shadows lengthening as the sun dipped lower in the sky. Her thoughts circled around the same question. What should I do? She knew she couldn't keep the coins, not without risking her family's safety, but giving them up also meant giving up the one chance she had to break free from the life of constant struggle. Her hands shook as she pulled the pouch out from its hiding place, the weight of the coins feeling heavier than before. Sam and Ethan watched her with worried expressions, sensing the tension that gripped their mother. She forced a smile, though it felt hollow, trying to reassure them. "I'm just thinking about a little adventure," she said, her voice strained but gentle. "We might have to take a trip for a few days, all right?" Sam frowned, his brows knitting together. "A trip? But what about school? And it'll be like a little vacation," she cut him off, her tone a little too bright, desperate to hide the fear she felt. "We'll go somewhere new just for a while. Wouldn't that be fun?" Ethan, younger and more trusting, nodded eagerly, but Sam kept watching her with that same skeptical look. He knew her too well, had seen her hide too many worries behind forced smiles. But he didn't push further, and for that, Emma was grateful, with a plan. Forming in her mind, she began to pack. She threw together the essentials: clothes, some food, a few favorite toys for Ethan, and tucked the pouch deep within her bag. Every noise from the hallway made her flinch, and every shadow through the peephole looked like the man in the hat coming back to demand what he thought was his. By nightfall, she had the boys bundled up in coats, ready to slip out of the apartment under cover of darkness. Her heart pounded in her chest as she led them down the stairs, the old building creaking beneath their hurried footsteps. But just as they reached the bottom floor, Emma froze. There, parked across the street, was the same sleek black car. Its engine idled softly, plumes of exhaust billowing in the cool night air. A figure sat inside, barely visible through the tinted windows, but she recognized the outline of his hat. Her blood ran cold, and she pulled the boys back, pressing them against the shadowed side of the stairwell. "He's watching the apartment." She held her breath, trying to think, to find a way out. They couldn't go through the front door without being seen, but she had no idea if there was another exit. She crouched down, speaking in a whisper so low that only Sam could hear her. "We have to find another way out, okay? Be quiet and follow me." He nodded, clutching Ethan's hand tightly as they moved back up the stairs, retracing their steps to the back of the building. Emma's mind raced, her fear sharpening her focus. She remembered an old fire escape that led down to the alleyway behind the building, a rusty metal ladder that she had always told the boys to stay away from. Now, it seemed like their only chance. She pushed open a window in the hallway and helped Sam climb through first, then Ethan, who clung to her as they made their way onto the narrows ledge. The wind bit at her cheeks, but she forced herself to keep moving, guiding the boys down the rickety ladder until their feet touched the ground. Just as they reached the alley, Emma heard the sound of footsteps behind her, heavy and purposeful. She glanced up, her heart leaping into her throat as she saw a shadow move across the window above. "He's inside!" Without a second thought, she grabbed Sam and Ethan's hands, pulling them down the alley, and away from the building they ran, their breaths clouding in the cold night air, the city stretching out before them like a labyrinth of darkness and danger. But as they turned a corner, Emma glanced back one last time, her eyes searching the darkness. The figure in the window stood still, watching them disappear into the night. A shiver ran down her spine, but she tightened her grip on her son's hands, forcing herself to keep moving. They were not safe. Yet, not even close, the cold air cut through their thin jackets as they ran, the echo of their footsteps swallowed by the sprawling city. Emma's mind was a whirl of panic, each breath burning in her chest as she tried to stay calm for the sake of her boys. She led them through a maze of back alleys and side streets, hoping to put as much distance between them and the mysterious figure as possible. Ethan stumbled, his small legs struggling to keep up, and she paused just long enough to scoop him up into her arms, feeling the weight of exhaustion settle into her bones. Sam, ever brave, kept a firm grip on her coat, glancing over his shoulder with eyes wide with fear. "Where are we going, Mom?" he asked, his voice barely more than a whisper, thick with anxiety. Emma hesitated, knowing that she had no real answer. She couldn't go to the police, not without risking losing the coins and possibly much more, but Staying in the city meant that the man in the hat would eventually find them. She needed a place to think, a place where they could be safe, at least for a night. She finally spotted an old motel at the end of a side street, its neon sign flickering in and out of life. The place looked run down, a haven for those who preferred to stay out of sight. It would have to do. She rushed inside, keeping her head down as she handed over some crumpled cash to the clerk behind the counter, who barely glanced up from his magazine. Their room was small and smelled of mildew, with wallpaper peeling at the corners and a TV that buzzed softly even when turned off. But it had a lock on the door, and for the first time that day, Emma felt a small sense of relief as she slid the chain into place. She set Ethan down on the bed, and he curled up against the thin pillow, his eyes heavy with sleep. Sam sat beside him, still. Looking worried, but too exhausted to ask more questions, Emma knelt in front of them, brushing a hand through their hair, trying to steady her breathing. "You did great, both of you," she said softly, trying to smile even as her mind reeled. "We're just going to rest here for a little while, okay? Everything's going to be all right." But even as she said the words, her gaze drifted to the window, where the darkness pressed in, thick and unyielding. I couldn't shake the feeling that they were still being watched, that the danger was closer than she realized. Once the boys had finally drifted off, Emma sat at the edge of the bed, the weight of the pouch in her pocket pressing into her leg. She took it out, staring down at the old coins and their strange engravings. "What am I missing?" she wondered, running a finger over the symbols that seemed to shift in the dim light. Her thoughts turned back to the man's words, the way he had spoken about the rug, about his employer wanting it back. Why throw it away if it was so valuable? And what was he really after? The rug? Or what was inside it? The questions buzzed in her mind like 1,000 bees, refusing to settle. She knew she couldn't run forever, not with her boys, but she also couldn't shake the feeling that whatever secrets the coins held, they were more than just a ticket to a better life. They were a key to something dangerous, something that someone was willing to go to great lengths to retrieve. As she sat in the silence of the room, a new plan began to form in her mind. She would find out what these coins meant, why they were worth so much to a man who wouldn't hesitate to threaten a mother and her children. Maybe, just maybe, if she understood their true value, she could find a way to use it to her advantage. She glanced at the sleeping forms of Sam and Ethan, their breaths even and calm, unaware of the storm raging around them. "I have to do this for them," she thought, steeling herself against the fear that coiled in her chest. "Whatever it takes, I'll keep them safe." Emma slipped the coins back into the pouch, hiding it beneath her pillow. Tomorrow, she would start searching for answers. But as she lay down beside her sons, the weight of the night's events pressing down on her, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were not alone, that even in this dingy motel room, the shadows held secrets that she had yet to uncover, and somewhere out there she knew, the man in the hat was still watching, still waiting. Emma awoke to the sound of a distant car horn, her body stiff from a night spent half awake, listening for footsteps in the hallway outside their door. The boys were still sleeping, their small bodies curled under the thin motel blanket. She moved quietly, slipping out of bed and pulling the pouch from beneath her pillow. She spread the coins across the small table by the window, the morning light casting a dull glow over their surfaces. Each one was different, their strange symbols unlike any currency she had ever seen. As she turned one of them over, her gaze caught on something, a tiny engraving along the edge, barely noticeable unless you were looking for it. It looked like a sequence of letters, worn but still legible. Her heart skipped a beat, a clue. She pulled out her phone, using its flashlight to illuminate the small letters, tracing them with her fingertip. A.D. Vive. The letters meant nothing to her, but they felt significant, like a piece of a larger puzzle she didn't yet understand. She knew she needed help to decipher this, but she had to be careful. Asking the wrong person could lead back to the man in the hat. She racked her brain, thinking of anyone she knew who might have the knowledge without asking too many questions. Her mind settled on a name. Mr. Hargrove, an old professor she had once worked for during her brief stint as a cleaning lady at the local university. He had always been kind to her, even after she left the job, and he had a reputation for being discreet. More importantly, he was an expert in ancient history and obscure artifacts. Emma quickly jotted down the address she remembered from years ago and gathered her things, waking the boys with a gentle shake. "We need to visit an old friend, all right?" she told them, forcing a reassuring smile. "It's going to be a bit of a drive, but I promise we'll be safe." The boys, still groggy, nodded without protest. They trusted her, and she clung to that trust like a lifeline. She bundled them into her car, a beat-up sedan that had seen better days, and they set off toward the outskirts of town, the city gradually giving way to quiet suburbs. It was almost noon by the time they pulled up in front of Mr. Hargrove's house, a small, ivy-covered cottage that looked like it belonged in a different century. Emma's nerves prickled as she walked up the cobblestone path, the pouch of coins heavy in her pocket. She knocked twice, then stepped back, holding her breath. After a long moment, the door creaked open, revealing the familiar face of Mr. Hargrove. He was older now, his hair thinner and his frame more bent, but his eyes still held the same sharpness she remembered. He blinked in surprise at the sight of her, but his expression quickly softened into a warm smile. "Emma, it's been years. What brings you all the way out here?" he asked, glancing down at the boys with a curious look. She managed a strained smile, her hands twisting together nervously. "I need your help. With something a bit unusual. Can I come in?" Mr. Hargrove's brow furrowed, but he stepped aside, waving them in. "Of course. Come in. Let's see what's got you looking so troubled." Emma followed him into the cluttered study, where books and papers covered every available surface. She glanced around, taking comfort in the familiarity of the room, before sitting down at the old wooden table. She took a deep breath, then pulled the pouch from her pocket, pouring the coins onto the table between them. "Mr.?" Hargrove's eyes widened as he picked up one of the coins, turning it over in his fingers with the careful touch of someone handling a rare artifact. "Where did you find these?" he asked, his voice low and cautious. Emma hesitated, unsure of how much to reveal. "They were hidden inside something that someone threw away," she said carefully, watching his reaction. "I think they might be important, but I don't know what they are." He leaned closer, his gaze sharpening as he examined the symbols. "These markings, they're ancient, older than most known currencies, and this engraving..." He paused, squinting at the tiny letters along the edge. "It's a reference. AIDV. It might mean Adventus, a term used in certain ancient rituals, or it could be an abbreviation of a name or even a place." He trailed off, looking up at her with a mixture of curiosity and concern. "Emma, you need to be very careful with these. If anyone knows you have them, they might be willing to go to great lengths to get them back." She nodded, her fears confirmed. "I know. And there's already someone looking for them. A man with a hat. He came to my apartment, threatened me. I had to run." Mr. Hargrove's expression grew serious, his fingers tightening around the coin. "Then you're in more danger than you realize. These coins? They're not just valuable. They're a key to something hidden, something that some might consider worth more than gold." He reached for a dusty tome on the shelf behind him, flipping through its yellowed pages with a speed that belied his age. When he stopped, he pointed to an illustration that matched the symbols on the coins almost perfectly. Emma's heart pounded as she leaned in to read the text beneath the image. Her mind spinning with the implications, the words spoke of an ancient order, a group of men who guarded secrets buried for centuries, secrets that could shift power, wealth, and the very fabric of society. And these coins, marked with their symbols, were said to be a map, a guide to a treasure long lost to history. Emma's mouth went dry as she met Mr. Hargrove's gaze. What does this mean for me?" she whispered, fear tightening around her chest. He closed the book, placing a hand over hers. "It means, my dear, that you're caught in something much larger than you. And if that man finds out you're looking for answers, he won't just stop at threats." Emma's thoughts swirled like a storm, each revelation twisting her sense of reality. The weight of Mr. Hargrove's words pressed down on her as he carefully wrapped the coins back into the pouch. The old professor's hands trembled slightly, a sign that he too felt the gravity of the situation. "Listen to me, Emma," he said, his voice a hushed urgency. "You must keep these hidden. If they truly are what I think, they're more than just ancient relics. They're connected to a secret that could put you in unimaginable danger. Whatever you do, don't let that man find you with them." Emma nodded, her mind racing. What about this map? Is it real or just some myth? She glanced at the book on the table, its pages filled. With sketches and cryptic text, Mr. Hargrove hesitated, his gaze flicking to the window as if expecting someone to burst through at any moment. "Most scholars think it's a myth, stories of lost treasures, buried knowledge, but if the symbols match, then there's a chance that it's real, and that means you hold the key to something people have been searching for over centuries. It could change everything, or ruin everything." Emma clutched the pouch tighter, her mind a mix of fear and a strange, inexplicable thrill. If she could uncover the truth behind the coins, it might be the leverage she needed to keep her family safe, but she knew she couldn't do it alone. "Will you help me?" she asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. "I don't know who else to trust." Mr. Hargrove glanced at the sleeping boys on the worn couch in his study, then back at Emma. He let out a weary sigh, rubbing his eyes. Beneath his glasses, "I'll help as much as I can, but this is dangerous, Emma. More dangerous than you realize. If you're willing to continue, we'll need to be careful." He pulled a map from a drawer, spreading it out on the table. It was old, the edges yellowed and frayed, marked with strange notations that mirrored some of the symbols on the coins. "This is a map of the region, one that dates back centuries. The engravings on your coins, if they're genuine, match a language that was spoken long before the city was built. They might point to a location, a place hidden beneath all of this." Emma studied the map, her heart pounding as she traced the lines that wound through the city and beyond, into the forested hills that bordered the outskirts. A small marking near the edge caught her eye, a symbol that matched one of the carvings on the coins. "What is this place?" she asked, pointing to the symbol. Mr. Hargrove's expression darkened. "An old estate, abandoned for decades. It was once owned by a family rumored to have ties to that ancient order. If the coins are a map, this could be where they lead." Emma stared at the spot on the map, a chill running down her spine. The estate was far outside the city limits, hidden deep in the woods where few dared to venture. It was the kind of place people spoke of in hushed tones, a remnant of a past no one wanted to remember. She knew the risks, but the pull of the unknown was too strong to ignore. "I have to go there," she said, her voice firm despite the fear curling in her stomach. "I need to know what this all means, and why that man wants it so badly." Mr. Hargrove studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I'll gather what information I can. But be careful, Emma. This isn't just about the coins anymore. If you're going to face whatever lies ahead, you need to be ready for whatever you might find." He slipped a piece of paper into her hand, a phone number scrawled in his shaky handwriting. "If you need help, call me, but don't trust anyone else. Not until you're sure of what you're dealing with." Emma tucked the paper into her pocket and gathered the boys, her mind set on the next step. As they left Mr. Hargrove's house, the city seemed to press in around them, the shadows deepening as dusk. Settled in, she glanced back at the old professor, his figure framed in the doorway, watching them with a look of quiet concern. She knew this was only the beginning. The coins, the map, the abandoned estate, they were pieces of a puzzle. She was only beginning to understand, but as she drove out of the city, leaving behind the familiar streets and the man in the hat, a grim determination settled in her chest. Whatever secrets the past held, she would uncover them, and she would keep her family safe, no matter what. The winding road out of the city seemed to stretch on forever, each mile carrying Emma further from the safety of the familiar and deeper into the unknown. The boys sat quietly in the back seat, their tired faces pressed against the windows as they watched the trees blur past, dense and shadowed under the fading light. Emma's knuckles were white around the steering wheel, her mind racing. With everything Mr. Hargrove had told her, she had always thought of herself as practical, grounded, but now she was caught up in something that felt like a story from another world. Ancient orders, hidden maps, and dangerous secrets buried in the past. Yet, beneath the fear, a strange sense of purpose burned within her. This journey wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about understanding why her life had been upended, why she and her sons had been pulled into this web of mystery. As night fell, the narrow road gave way to a dirt path, barely visible under the canopy of trees that seemed to swallow the last light of the day. Emma slowed the car to a crawl, squinting at the faded road signs, looking for any clue that she was on the right track. The directions Mr. Hargrove had scribbled down led her further into the forest, where the air grew colder and the shadows seemed to press closer. Finally, after what felt like hours, the shape of an old gate loomed up out of the darkness, rusted iron bars tangled with vines. Beyond it, a narrow drive wound up a hill, disappearing into the overgrown woods. Emma's heart pounded in her chest as she pushed open the gate, its hinges creaking loudly in the silence, and drove through, the crunch of gravel beneath her tires the only sound. They reached the end of the drive, where a massive, crumbling estate stood. Like a ghost against the night sky, its windows were dark, its once grand facade now weathered and broken by time. Ivy crawled up the stone walls, twisting through shattered windows, and the front door hung slightly ajar, swaying in the wind. "Mom, are we gonna stay here?" Sam's voice broke through the quiet, his small face pinched with uncertainty as he stared at the looming structure. Emma forced a smile, though she felt anything but confident. "Just for a little while, until I can figure out what we need to do next." She reached back, squeezing his hand. "Stay close to me, okay? Don't wander off." With a deep breath, she gathered their bags and led the boys toward the house, her footsteps crunching over the brittle leaves that littered the path. As they crossed the threshold, a chill swept through the air, colder than the night outside, and Emma felt a shiver run down her spine. She flicked on, a flashlight, its beam cutting through the dust-filled darkness, revealing a grand entry hall that had long since fallen into ruin. The air smelled of damp and decay, but beneath it lingered something else, a faint metallic scent that made Emma's stomach twist. She shook off the feeling and focused on finding a place where they could settle for the night. They moved through the echoing halls, past rooms filled with rotting furniture and broken glass, until they found a small parlor with a fireplace and an intact door. Emma set down their bags, trying to create a semblance of comfort. She gathered some of the old logs stacked by the hearth, lighting a fire that crackled weakly, but managed to bring a little warmth into the room. Ethan curled up on an old sofa, his eyelids already drooping with exhaustion, while Sam sat close by, his wide eyes scanning the shadows that danced along the walls. "Mom, this place feels weird," he murmured, glancing over at her as she knelt by the fire. "Like it's haunted or something." Emma forced a chuckle, ruffling his hair. "It's just old Sam, nothing to worry about." But even as she said the words, her gaze lingered on the darkened corners of the room, where the shadows seemed thicker, hiding secrets she wasn't ready to face. She took out the pouch of coins, setting them on the table beside the firelight. The symbols glinted in the flickering glow, each one a reminder of the questions that had led them here. She turned one over, tracing the familiar engraving of ADV. her mind working through the puzzle that had been thrust upon her. She reached for the old map Mr. Hargrove had given her, spreading it out on the dusty floor. The symbols on the coins matched certain points along the map, forming a path that twisted through the estate's grounds and into the woods beyond. She marked each spot with a pencil, connecting the dots until a pattern emerged, a route that led deeper into the forest, to a place marked only by a single cryptic symbol. She stared at the map, a knot of dread forming in her stomach. Whatever the coins were pointing to, it lay beyond the estate, hidden somewhere in the shadows of the woods. The fire crackled, and a gust of wind rattled the broken windows, sending a chill through the room. Emma folded the map and slipped it back into her bag, her resolve hardening. Tomorrow, I'll follow the path. I'll find out what's hidden out there. She glanced at her boys, her heart aching with the weight of their safety. And I'll find a way to end this before that man finds us. She settled beside them, pulling her coat tighter as she kept watch over the fire and the darkness beyond. The house creaked around them, its old bones groaning in the night. But it was the rustling in the woods outside that kept her from closing her eyes. The feeling that something was moving out there, watching, waiting. The morning light crept through the broken windows of the old estate, casting long shadows across the dusty floor. Emma stirred, her body stiff from a restless night spent listening to the strange creaks and groans of the house. The fire had long since died, leaving only cold ashes in the hearth. She glanced at the boys, still sleeping under the thin blankets she'd managed to scavenge from the house, with the map tucked into her coat pocket and the pouch of coins safely hidden in her bag. Emma ventured out into the estate's grounds, careful not to stray too far from the crumbling walls. The air was crisp and cool, the kind that carried whispers through the trees, making her shiver despite herself. She followed the route she had traced on the map the night before, her footsteps crunching over the fallen leaves that blanketed the ground. The path wound through overgrown gardens and ancient oaks that loomed overhead like silent sentinels. It led her to the edge of the property, where a narrow trail branched off into the woods, barely visible beneath the dense underbrush. Emma hesitated, glancing back at the distant silhouette of the estate behind her. Her instincts screamed at her to turn back, to keep her children safe within the old walls. But she knew the answer she sought lay further in. Beyond the boundary of the familiar, she steeled herself and pushed forward, the branches clawing at her coat as she forced her way through the thicket. The deeper she went, the thicker the trees became, their twisted limbs blocking out the light until the woods around her seemed to grow darker with each step. The air was heavy, carrying a damp, earthy scent that clung to her senses, making her skin prickle. After nearly an hour of hiking, she reached a small clearing where the ground sloped down into a shallow basin, hidden beneath a canopy of ancient oaks. At its center stood an old stone structure, half collapsed and covered in moss like a forgotten tomb. Vines twisted around its base, and the ground around it was littered with stones etched with the same symbols as the coins. Emma's breath caught in her throat. This was the place the map had pointed to, the final destination of the strange path. She stepped closer, her hands brushing against the rough stones, feeling the chill seep into her skin. She knelt before a large stone slab that sat at the center, covered in carvings that mirrored those on the coins. She reached into her pocket and pulled out one of the coins, pressing it against the symbols. To her surprise, it fit perfectly into a small indentation. As if it had been made for this purpose, her heart pounded as she repeated the process with the remaining coins, each one clicking into place like pieces of a puzzle. As she pressed the last coin into its slot, a low rumble shook the ground beneath her feet. Emma stumbled back, watching in disbelief as the stone slab shifted, sliding away to reveal a dark passage leading down into the earth. A gust of stale, cold air rushed out from the opening, carrying, with it, the scent of something ancient, untouched for centuries. She hesitated at the edge of the darkness, gripping the flashlight she had brought from the car. The beam cut through the shadows, revealing stone steps that descended into the depths. Her mind screamed with warnings, but curiosity and the need for answers pushed her forward. With a deep breath, Emma descended into the darkness, the air growing colder with each step. The walls around her were carved with the same cryptic symbols, their edges worn smooth by time. The passage wound deeper, twisting beneath the earth until she emerged into a vast chamber, its ceiling lost in the darkness above. In the center of the chamber stood a pedestal, and upon it rested a wooden box, its surface etched with symbols she now recognized as part of the ancient order. Her hands trembled as she reached out, brushing her fingers over the intricate carvings. The box was surprisingly light, as if whatever it held inside was meant to be found by someone like her, someone willing to risk everything to uncover the truth. She lifted the lid, her breath catching as the contents were revealed. A stack of brittle, yellowed pages covered in delicate handwriting, and a small glass vial filled with a dark, swirling liquid. Emma's mind raced as she realized the significance of what she had found. These pages, this vial, they held knowledge, secrets that could explain the value of the coins and the power they hinted at. But before she could examine them further, the sound of footsteps echoed through the chamber, coming from the passage behind her. Her blood turned to ice, and she spun around, her flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. A shadow moved at the edge of the light, and she knew, with a sickening certainty, that she was not alone. She shoved the pages and the vial back into the box, clutching it tightly against her chest as she backed toward the passage. The footsteps grew louder, slow and deliberate, like someone who knew exactly where she would be. She held her breath, slipping into the shadows at the edge of the chamber, praying that the darkness would hide her. The figure stepped into the chamber, and Emma recognized the shape of the man in the hat, his silhouette stark against the ancient walls. He paused, turning slowly as if searching the darkness for her, and his voice rang out, low and mocking. "You can't hide forever, Emma. You should have handed it over when you had the chance." She bit down on her lip, her mind racing for an escape. "I need to get back to the boys." The thought gave her strength, and she clutched the box tighter, retreating into the darkness as the man's voice echoed through the chamber, taunting her with every step. Emma's pulse pounded in her ears as she crouched in the shadows, clutching the box to her chest. The chamber seemed to shrink around her, every sound amplified by the oppressive darkness. The man in the hat moved with unnerving calm, his footsteps echoing off the ancient stone walls as he paced slowly around the pedestal. "Do you even know what you found?" he called out, his voice dripping with condescension. "It's not just treasure, Emma. It's knowledge, power that could reshape everything. But it's far too dangerous for someone like you." Emma's mind raced, her grip tightening on the box as she inched along the wall, keeping her flashlight off to avoid drawing his attention. She knew she couldn't confront him directly. He was stronger, more prepared, but if she could reach the passage, she might be able to get back to the surface and to her boys before he realized she was gone. Her foot brushed against a loose stone, and she froze as it tumbled across the floor with a clatter. The man stopped, turning his head sharply in her direction. His shadowed figure loomed larger as he stepped closer, his breath coming in slow, measured puffs that filled the cold air. "Running won't save you," he said, his tone darker now, all pretense of politeness gone. "You have no idea what's at stake." But Emma refused to listen. She steeled herself, then bolted for the passage, her shoes scraping against the stone floor. The flashlight flickered to life in her hand, casting a narrow beam that cut through the darkness. The man lunged toward her, his hands outstretched, but she slipped past him. Adrenaline lending her a speed she didn't know she had, she sprinted up the steps, the ancient walls closing in on either side, the air growing warmer as she ascended. Behind her, she heard the man curse under his breath, his footsteps thundering after her, closing the distance with every stride. She clung to the box, her mind focused on only one thought. "I have to get back to my boys." The passageway felt longer than before, twisting and turning, but at last, she saw the faint glow of daylight filtering through the entrance above. She stumbled out into the clearing, gasping for air, and immediately ran toward the car where Sam and Ethan waited, their faces pressed against the window in anxious anticipation. "Get in! Now!" she shouted, wrenching open the car door. The boys scrambled into the back seat, their eyes wide with fear. Emma jumped behind the wheel, jamming the keys into the ignition as the man emerged from the woods, his face twisted with anger. He sprinted toward the car, and Emma slammed her foot on the gas, the tires spinning in the dirt before catching traction. The car lurched forward, throwing up a cloud of dust as they sped down the narrow path. In the rearview mirror, she saw the man skid to a stop, watching them disappear down the road with a look of cold fury. Emma's hands shook as she gripped the steering wheel, her breaths coming in ragged gasps. Sam leaned forward between the seats, his voice trembling. "Mom, who is that man? Why is he chasing us?" She swallowed hard, her mind still reeling from the encounter. "He's someone who wants what we have," she said, her voice wavering. "But we're not going to let him take it. I promise you, I'll keep you safe." Ethan clung to her coat, his small hands shaking. "Where are we going now, Mom? Are we ever going back home?" Emma glanced at him through the rearview mirror, her heart breaking at the fear in his eyes. She forced herself to smile, though it felt more like a grimace. "We're going somewhere safe, sweetheart. Somewhere he can't find us." She tightened, her grip on the wheel, her mind set on a new plan. They couldn't stay in one place for long, not with that man on their trail, but there had to be answers somewhere, a way to use the knowledge in the box to protect her family. As the road stretched out before them, winding through the dense woods, Emma felt a new determination take hold. She had uncovered something powerful, something that others would kill to possess. But she would not let that power destroy her or her sons. If the coins and the secrets they guarded were the key to their survival, then she would unlock them. No matter the cost, the car barreled down the winding road. Emma's focus split between keeping an eye on the rearview mirror and navigating the unfamiliar turns. The dense forest around them began to thin as they approached the edge of a small town, nestled at the foot of a range of hills. It was a place she had never visited before, isolated and quiet, the kind of town that didn't ask questions of strangers. She pulled into a rundown motel on the outskirts, her hands shaking as she parked the car. The boys clambered out, their faces pale with exhaustion and fear, but Emma forced a reassuring smile, guiding them inside. She paid for a room in cash, avoiding the clerk's curious gaze as they hurried down the hallway. Inside the small, dimly lit room, Emma set the box on the table, her mind racing with questions about what she had found. The pages inside were fragile, written in a script that looked as old as the forest itself, and the glass vials seemed to swirl with a dark liquid that caught the light in strange ways. The boys settled onto the bed, too tired to question her, but Emma couldn't rest. She picked up the first page, her eyes scanning the flowing, archaic handwriting. The words were in a language she didn't understand, but at the bottom of the page, a series of symbols caught her eye. Symbols that matched those engraved on the coins. Her pulse quickened as she realized it might be a cipher, a way to decode the secrets hidden in the ancient text. She took out the coins, laying them beside the pages, trying to match the symbols. But as she turned the coins over, she noticed something she hadn't before. A tiny notch along the edge of one, almost imperceptible. She pressed against it, and with a soft click, a compartment opened inside the coin, revealing a rolled piece of paper no larger than a matchstick. Emma's hands trembled as she unrolled it, revealing a single line of text, written in the same script as the pages. Adventus illuminabit tenebras. She recognized the Latin, even if her pronunciation was rusty. The arrival will illuminate the darkness. The phrase sent a chill down her spine, as if the words held a warning or a promise. But she had no time to ponder their meaning. A soft knock at the door startled her, making her nearly drop the coin. She froze, her mind spinning with possibilities. Could it be the man in the hat? Had he tracked them here so quickly? Her heart pounded in her chest as she motioned for Sam and Ethan to stay quiet. creeping toward the door to peer through the peephole. Instead of the man, she saw the face of Mr. Hargrove, pale and drawn. His eyes darted nervously over his shoulder, and he leaned closer to the door, whispering urgently, "Emma, it's me. Let me in. There's no time." Relief washed over her, but it was tinged with confusion. She unbolted the door and pulled him inside, glancing around the empty parking lot before shutting it tightly behind him. "Mister?" Hargrove clutched a thick folder under one arm, his hand shaking as he set it on the table beside the open box. "How did you find us?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "And why are you here? I thought you said—" "I didn't have a choice," he interrupted, his eyes wide with fear. "They're coming for you, Emma. That man, he's not working alone. They know what you have, and they won't stop until they get it. I found something that might help, but you need to act fast." He opened the folder, revealing old maps, photographs, and documents that looked like they had been pulled from the university's archives. One of the photos showed the estate Emma had just left, but in its prime, a grand building surrounded by men in dark robes, their faces hidden beneath hoods. She shivered, recognizing the same symbols carved into the estate's stone walls. "These people, they've been looking for those coins for centuries," Mr. Hargrove explained, his voice trembling. "They believe the coins hold a key to an ancient power, something hidden beneath that estate, the vial, the writings. They're part of a ritual, a way to unlock whatever is buried there." Emma's head spun with the weight of his words. "What does that have to do with me?" she demanded. "I didn't ask for any of this. I just found those coins in a rug. I don't even understand what they want from me." Mr. Hargrove's gaze softened, but his expression remained grave. "You became a part of this the moment you took those coins, Emma. They think you might be the one to complete what they started, whether you want to or not. That's why they're after you, why they won't let you go." He reached into the folder, pulling out a faded letter with the same script as the writings in the box. He handed it to her, pointing to a passage highlighted in red ink. "This. It mentions an illuminator, someone who can reveal the path that leads to their power. They believe the coins. We're meant to find that person, and you, Emma. You're the first in generations to make it this far." Her hands shook as she stared at the letter, her mind refusing to accept the enormity of what he was saying. "I'm not some chosen one," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I just want to protect my children." Mr. Hargrove placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, his expression sorrowful. "I know, but they won't stop coming. You need to decide whether you'll run or whether you'll face this, and if you do, you'll need to find out what those pages truly mean. It might be your only chance." Emma's mind reeled, but she forced herself to focus, her gaze shifting to the pages spread out before her. She had to make a choice: run further into the unknown, or confront the secrets that had turned her life upside down. And as the shadows deepened outside the window, she felt the weight of that decision settle heavily on her chest. The motel room seemed to close in around Emma as the implications of Mr. Hargrove's words sank in. The ancient order, the ritual, the role she had unknowingly stepped into. Each revelation felt like another chain tightening around her. She stared at the cryptic letters, the pages, the vial that swirled with dark promise. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to take her sons far away from this madness. But deep down, she knew that running would no longer keep them safe, Mister. Hargrove watched her with a mix of urgency and pity, his breath coming in shallow gasps. He seemed older, more fragile than when she had last seen him, as if the weight of what he knew had been crushing him for years. "If you're going to confront them, you need to understand what you're dealing with," he said quietly, opening the book he had brought. "The Order believes that the coins, the vial, and the writings all point to a hidden power, something buried beneath that estate. They call it the Veil, a source of knowledge or energy that could change everything. Emma shook her head, struggling to make sense of it all. What does that have to do with me? Why would they think I could unlock it? Mr. Hargrove hesitated, flipping through the brittle pages of the old book until he found a passage marked in faded ink. The writings speak of a seeker, someone who would come when, as if it belonged to someone else entirely, but now it was tied to her, to the danger that loomed over her family. She turned away from the table, her thoughts swirling, and looked at her boys, who were curled up on the bed, lost in a sleep that looked anything but peaceful. I can't let them live in fear like this. She swallowed hard, forcing herself to face the reality of her situation. She had a choice to make, and for their sake, she couldn't afford to be afraid. She turned back to Mr. Hargrove, her voice steadier than she felt. I'll do it. I'll confront them, find out what these coins really mean, and end this. But I need to know what to expect, how to use whatever is hidden in these writings to protect my family. Mr. Hargrove let out a breath, a mixture of relief and apprehension passing over his face. He nodded, pulling a pen from his pocket and scribbling a set of coordinates on a scrap of paper. These lead to a place where the order once gathered, an old chapel in the hills, not far from the estate. It's where they performed their rituals, where they believed the veil could be accessed. If you go there, you might find the answers you need. Emma took the paper, glancing at the coordinates before tucking it into her pocket. And what about him? The man who's after me, she asked, her voice dropping to a whisper. Mr. Hargrove's expression darkened. He's dangerous, Emma. He's more than just a follower of the order. He's one of their enforcers, someone who believes that the secrets they guard are worth any sacrifice. He won't stop until he gets what he wants, and he's willing to do whatever it takes. She nodded, her jaw tightening with resolve. Then I'll be ready for him, whatever he's planning. I'll make sure he doesn't get the chance to carry it out. Mr. Hargrove reached out, gripping her hand with surprising strength. Be careful, these people. They play by rules that most of us don't understand. But if anyone can change the game, it's you. Don't let them take that from you. Emma squeezed his hand in return, feeling a surge of gratitude for his unexpected support. She knew this was more than she had ever asked for, more than she had ever imagined. But as she glanced at the sleeping forms of Sam and Ethan, she felt a fierce determination rise within her. She had been running for too long. Now it was time to face whatever lay ahead. The sun was just beginning to set as Emma drove through the winding roads that led to the coordinates Mr. Hargrove had given her. The car's engine hummed steadily, a comforting sound against the quiet tension that filled the air. Sam and Ethan sat in the back, their expressions reflecting a mixture of curiosity and fear. Emma's hands gripped the cow, steering wheel tightly, her mind focused on the chapel hidden somewhere in the hills. The road grew narrower, lined with towering pines that blocked out the last light of day. At last, the silhouette of the chapel came into view, an old, crumbling structure nestled between the trees, its stone walls covered in ivy. The place looked abandoned, forgotten by time. But Emma sensed a presence lingering in the shadows, like a memory that refused to fade. She parked the car at a distance, turning to the boys with a firm expression. Stay here, and don't open the door for anyone but me. Understand? Her voice wavered slightly, but she forced a smile for their sake. I'll be back soon. I just need to take care of something. Sam nodded, his hand gripping Ethan's tightly. Be careful, Mom. Emma nodded back, then stepped out into the chilly air, the pouch of coins tucked into her coat. She moved quickly toward the chapel, the leaves crunching underfoot. The air grew colder as she approached, and a sense of foreboding settled over her like a shroud. Inside, the chapel was dark and silent, its stone floors covered in dust. The air was thick with the scent of damp and decay, and the pews had long since rotted away. At the far end of the room, a stone altar stood beneath a broken stained glass window, casting fractured beams of light across the floor. Emma approached the altar, her heart pounding as she laid the box and the coins on the cold stone surface. She glanced around the shadowed corners of the chapel, half expecting the man in the hat to emerge from the darkness, but there was only silence. She opened the box, pulling out the brittle pages and the glass vial. The ancient symbols on the pages seemed to shimmer in the fading light, as if urging her to read. She traced the script with trembling fingers, feeling the weight of the centuries pressing down on her. Adventus illumin bit tenebras. The words echoed in her mind as she uncorked the vial, the dark liquid inside swirling with a strange, otherworldly glow. She hesitated, then poured a few drops onto the pages, watching in awe as the ink shifted, revealing new lines of text that had been hidden beneath the surface. The message spoke of a ritual, a way to unlock the veil's power and reveal the knowledge hidden within. It described an incantation, a series of gestures that would open the path to the truth. But as she read further, Emma realized that the ritual also came with a cost, a sacrifice that would bind the seeker to the veil, trapping them within its influence. A chill swept through her, and she glanced back toward the entrance, her mind racing. Is this what the man wanted? To force me to complete this ritual for him? She clenched, her fists, feeling a surge of anger rise within her. She wouldn't be a pawn in their game. Not when so much was at stake. A noise behind her made her spin around, her heart leaping into her throat. The man in the hat stepped out of the shadows, his face twisted with a cruel smile. "You're braver than I thought coming here alone," he said, his voice echoing through the chapel. "But you don't understand what you're dealing with. That power doesn't belong to you." Emma backed away from the altar, clutching the box to her chest. "Why are you doing this?" she demanded, her voice shaking with anger and fear. "What do you want from me?" He took a step closer, his eyes glinting with something dark. "The Order has guarded these secrets for centuries, keeping the veil's power hidden from those who would misuse it. But you..." He pointed at her, his expression turning cold. "You stumbled into something you could never understand. You're a threat to everything we've protected." Emma's mind raced, trying to make sense of his words. "I don't care about your order or your secrets. I just want to keep my family safe." The man's smile faded, replaced by a look of grim determination. "Then you know what you must do? Hand over the box, perform the ritual, and give the power to those who know how to use it, or I'll make sure you never leave this place." Emma felt a surge of defiance, the weight of all she had endured pushing back against the fear that gripped her. She glanced at the altar, the ancient symbols glowing faintly in the dying light. She knew that if she completed the ritual, it would mean giving up her freedom, possibly even her life. But if she didn't, the power would fall into the hands of those who had hunted her, who would use it for their own dark purposes. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. "No," she said, her voice firm. "You won't control me, and you won't take this power." The man's eyes narrowed, his hand darting toward his coat pocket. But before he could draw whatever weapon he hid there, Emma poured the remaining liquid from the vial over the pages, chanting the words she had memorized from the ancient text. The air crackled with energy, and a blinding light erupted from the altar, flooding the chapel with a searing brilliance. The man let out a shout, stumbling back as the light engulfed him, casting his shadow against the walls. Emma shielded her eyes, feeling the power surge through her, as if the very fabric of the chapel was being torn open. She could see glimpses of something beyond, a vast, swirling expanse that shimmered with impossible colors. And in that moment, she knew what she had to do. She focused all her will on the ritual, bending the power to her command. The man's voice faded, swallowed by the light, and Emma felt the veil shift around her, bending to her will as she sealed its secrets away once more. With a final breath, she released the energy, and the light receded, leaving only the cold darkness of the chapel behind. She staggered back, gasping for air, the box clattering to the floor beside her. The man was gone, his presence erased by the force of the ritual. Emma sank to her knees, exhaustion crashing over her, but a sense of calm filled her chest. She had done it. She had taken control, protected the power from those who would use it for harm, and as she glanced back toward the chapel's entrance, she saw the first rays of dawn breaking through the shattered window, filling the ancient stone room with warmth. Emma sat on the cold floor of the chapel, the air still humming with the remnants of the power she had unleashed. Her hands ached from gripping the edges of the altar, and every breath felt like a struggle. But she knew that the danger had passed. The man in the hat, along with whatever dark intentions he harbored, was gone, swept away by the force she had summoned. She picked up the box, now empty and lifeless, and slipped the pages back inside. The ancient symbols on the altar had faded. The glow that had once pulsed through them reduced to mere etchings in the stone. Whatever the veil had held, it was hidden once more, locked away beyond the reach of those who sought its power. Staggering to her feet, she moved toward the chapel entrance, each step a reminder of the weight she had borne for her family. When she emerged into the morning light, the cool air filled her lungs, bringing with it a sense of renewal. She spotted the car in the distance, where Sam and Ethan watched from the back seat, their faces pressed against the windows. They scrambled out. As she approached, running to her with relief and worry etched into their expressions, Emma dropped to her knees, wrapping them both in a tight embrace, feeling their warmth chase away the last of the chill that had settled in her bones. "Mom, are you okay?" Sam's voice wavered as he clung to her. "What happened in there? We saw the light." Emma squeezed his hand, forcing a tired smile. "It's over now. We're safe. That man won't be coming after us anymore." She ruffled Ethan's hair, pressing a kiss to his forehead. "I promise we're going to be okay." The boys looked at her with a mixture of relief and confusion, but she could see that they trusted her words. Even if they didn't fully understand them, she glanced back at the chapel, its ancient stones bathed in the glow of morning, and felt a strange peace settle over her heart. They drove away from the hills, leaving behind the secrets buried in the earth, the mysteries that had upended their lives. Emma knew there would be challenges ahead, questions that she couldn't yet answer, but she also knew that they had survived, and that they could begin to build a new life away from the shadows that had threatened them. As the town faded in the rearview mirror, Emma found herself thinking of Mr. Hargrove, of the help he had offered despite the danger. She hoped he had made it safely away from the city, beyond the reach of the order that had chased her, but deep down, she knew that they would always carry a connection, a shared understanding of the darkness they had faced. They drove for hours, following the winding roads until they reached a small coastal town where the air smelled of salt and the waves crashed gently against the shore. It was the kind of place where strangers could become invisible, where new beginnings were possible. Emma found a small house to rent, far from the life they had known, where she could finally let her guard down and watch her sons play on the beach without fear. And as she sat on the porch one evening, watching the sun set over the water, she took the box from her bag one last time. The coins had lost their glow, their secrets hidden once more, but she kept them as a reminder of the power she had faced, of the courage she had found within herself. She buried the box beneath a sturdy oak tree in the backyard, where its mystery could remain undisturbed, a secret known only to her. She closed her eyes, feeling the breeze brush against her face, and for the first time in months, she allowed herself to breathe freely. The weight of the past had not disappeared, but it had grown lighter, leaving space for hope. For a future she had thought lost. As the stars began to fill the sky, Emma whispered a quiet prayer into the darkness. A prayer for peace, for safety, for the chance to rebuild what had been broken. And as she listened to the waves, she felt the answer in her heart. As steady and sure as the tide, whatever challenges might come, she would face them with the strength she had found, and with her sons by her side, she knew that they would find a way through, together.